welcome to our B2B webinar. Thank you for joining us. My name's John Boxer. I'll be your host today. I've spent 15 years working with companies to deploy their customer and employee feedback programs. Prior to that, I worked in the contact center industry and customer service. I'm joined today by my colleague, Derek Eccleston. Derek joined InMoment's EMEA Consulting and Insights team with a wealth of experience within CX and related industries, having previously held positions at Digital Research, Harris Interactive and Sony Europe. He's an active member of the Professional Development Advisory Board at the Market Research Society as well. As a consultant in InMoment, he adds value and direction to some of the world's leading CX programs across all sorts of sectors, as diverse as automotive, media, financial services. Derek, forgive me, but the mantra that we hear from him is around design, implement, manage, and drive results from customer experience measurement and management programs. So today we're going to be discussing which steps to take in order to design engaging surveys as a vital means to increase response rates, as well as how to embed the feedback culture with your internal teams to drive excitement and real value in the business. In B2B feedback, it's less frequent. I think we all appreciate that. So when you do ask it, a high response rate and detailed responses are crucial in order to gain an understanding of your customers' emotions, gain access to the most important moments, providing you with enough insights to make informed decisions and take actions. Before I hand over to Derek, I just want to put some numbers in front of you. These come from Forbes and Salesforce. And we all understand that B2B is very different from B2C, but often we see programs where people don't treat it differently. Forbes has identified that B2B companies have on average a far lower customer experience score. But interestingly, the customers of B2B companies have identified that the experience is very important to them. And in many cases, they will pay a premium to get that. So that's going to form the basis of the conversation that we want to have today. Before I hand off to Derek, I just want to say, if you've got any questions, there is a Q&A button at the bottom and also a chat button. So if you want to pop those in there, then if we've got time at the end, then we will endeavour to answer those. So over to you, Derek.
Thank you very much, John, and hello and welcome to everyone, and thanks so much from me as well for joining today. So we've seen from those numbers just now that John shared that there's an opportunity. The customer feedback sentiment generally is less positive than in the B2C arena. What that means is B2B players who can deliver fantastic customer experiences and demonstrate experience improvement over time do have an opportunity to be differentiated in the marketplace. And the one on the right obviously confirmed that the B2B sector gets the importance of doing the right thing by the customer. We have conversations time and time again with B2B players who come to us and they say to us, you know, we've got by to date by having great products, the best quality, the best price, but we know that that's not going to be enough going forward. We need to deliver the best experience as well. We need to invest in service and people and culture to facilitate that. And that's a conversation that we have many times over with clients from different B2B sectors. So there's a lot of excitement and a lot of opportunity in B2B. So we're going to talk about how to get there potentially, and the steps and the building blocks and all of that. But I have to point out what we as a B2B community know, that this is hard. If it wasn't hard, you know, then we'd all be doing it and there wouldn't be any differentiation. So again, whenever there's a challenge, there's an opportunity to stick with it. Why is it hard? It's because we have a finite audience and we need to have dialogue with them many times over time. And we need to manage that contact strategy to ensure that we're having meaningful conversations with customers. We're collecting the data we need to drive experience improvement. But at the same time, this whole feedback loop and action loop is not onerous on the participants. So that's a key thing. Second, routes to market can be complicated. We work with an engine manufacturer that sells into OEM vehicle manufacturers that then sell through distributors in regional markets and onto dealers. So they're 2 or 3 steps removed, our client was, from the customer. They want to know the customer feedback around the finished vehicle and how it performs in situ. And so that becomes difficult. So there are ways to manage that, that kind of challenge as well. So it is difficult, it is hard. So let's talk about how we get there and how we do what we can. Now, the first point I'd like to make, and this is probably the most important point to make in this session. I know it's about design, but it would be remiss of me not to point out that it's a mistake to jump straight into design. We've seen it time and time again with clients that we've worked with, that you absolutely have to do these preliminary steps before you get to design. And we'll always say this, and we'll all advise our clients to follow these steps before they start designing surveys and data sets that they need, and sourcing data from different parts of the systems of the client, and so on and so forth. So first of all, who are the stakeholders that we need to be moving forward in one motion together to success? Success in terms of client performance, our performance through our partnership with the clients, and so on and so forth, and all the partners and intermediaries. So that's the first piece we do, is to define the stakeholders. And I call it stakeholders because some of these are customers, some of these are partners, some of these are intermediaries, and so on and so forth. They all matter, and they're all material to the success of this whole endeavor. So that's the starting point. The second point is, what do the experiences look like? We need those journey maps to be documented, not just so that we can build the foundation, build on that foundation to design a great XI program. By the way, we call it XI because that's the InMoment way. We're about experience improvement. CX doesn't cut it anymore. Measurement isn't enough. We need to demonstrate improvement to retain momentum behind these programs. So let's understand those journey maps, but also let's make that a collaborative view, because in any B2B environment I've been in, there will be different versions of the customer journey map. We need to get everybody together to agree a common foundation for this program. We always stress again that every program has to ladder up to the priorities of the CEO. What are the outcomes that the CEO, and any organization I've talked with, the CEO will be banging on about 3 things. You know, this year we need to achieve this, this, and this. And so we need to be absolutely linked into that, those objectives to ensure the relevance of what we're doing. Only then can we start architecting a program. So we know all those other bits and pieces. Now we can start architecting a program in terms of operational levers, strategic view, strengths and weaknesses of the business, where do we need to invest, and all those wonderful things that we can support and drive through a program. And then we get to the design of the actual listening programs. And as I alluded to before, some of this will be surveys, some of this will be data from other sources like contact center notes, potentially even social environments in the B2B space. Doesn't really matter as long as we have the data that we need to drive smart decision making. So that is the structure we follow, and we would advise that to any B2B embarking on this journey, or resetting what they've already got, or empowering and fueling the direction that they're on. So the stakeholder personas, I've already touched on what these might be, just putting in some examples here. And when we talk about personas and agree who's key to our success in this mission, it's always good to think, well, we need these people involved in this. Just one example of that, if we don't get their responses, then we can't action what they need. So we need these people involved, and therefore we need to think about what the benefit of the program is to each and every one of them. And so when we define our personas, we do brainstorm with our client partners and advise them, because we've been through this many times before, What's going to really get the client branch excited? What's going to remove any barriers to them jumping in, getting involved, and enjoying and benefiting from the process? We do the same for the other. These are just examples. It will be different in any scenario. But once we've had a think about what buttons to press, then we can present this program to them in the right way, in such a way that they will see the benefit, they will jump in, they will get involved, because we absolutely have to have a universal buy-in to this, an endorsement from the CEO, excitement at the front line, and all levels in between, because we've found that if you don't have that in place, then you're pushing water uphill in terms of trying to achieve what you're trying to achieve. So then we get on to the journey mapping. Now this is a subject all by itself, which we can potentially do a session on at some other time. We have done in the past, but I just wanted to put a simple example in to get us thinking about what this might involve. So obviously it's about the journeys, the steps, the experiences, the make or break moments, the intense moments, the moments where we see real sort of defining experiences, moments that matter surfacing. Where do they occur? Good or bad? Let's think about when people start to get emotional, and we know that's what will determine the overall sentiment of the customer. It's what they'll remember and what will drive their behaviors downstream. Now, we've got lots of journey maps. I didn't want to share them because they tend to be quite complicated, but just to summarize, there's going to be an onboarding, a prospecting, a researching, selecting, and all of that. But that potentially could be a one-off endeavor in a long engagement. So then the focus would be the BAU steps, the renewals, the service upsells, and all of those things. So it's important that we have sight of all of that, what from a customer's perspective, so that we know what to focus on, and we design our program around that to make sure we've got sight of those levers so that we can drive them. And as I mentioned before, with particular focus on those moments that matter, where things can get a bit intense and the future relationship can be defined. Let's make sure we're across those moments, that we're listening, we're tuned into them, and we're driving and affecting those outcomes. So that's the customer journey mapping piece in brief. The outcomes, as I mentioned before, may look a bit like this. They will vary by every business, but as I mentioned before, every CEO I've heard speak or been fortunate enough to talk to directly will always be banging on. I put 4 up here, but it's usually 3, but I'm sure you'll have them in your organization. We have to show that our program drives these outcomes if we're going to be relevant. So only then do we get to architecting a program. Now, this is a typical classic architecture of a experience improvement program. Now, at the top level, you will have the brand in market, notoriously difficult to do in the B2B environment because it's hard to get feedback from the wider market outside of the customer base. They're not that easy to reach in terms of getting feedback from. But there are ways and means to establish your relative position in the marketplace because that's what it's all about. It's all very well excelling at the billing and invoicing journey or the the service annual service or whatever it may be. That's fine, but it's not about that. It's being better than the alternative, and so we do need to work to get some market-wide brand measures in that. Then the relationship survey will typically be once a year or twice a year to the whole base, not triggered by an event. That gives us our overview of the health of the base, and that gives us sight as to where we need to focus in terms of strategic strengths and weaknesses based on the driver analysis that we would do on that data to get that. Okay, journey touch point, self-explanatory. We work with a food service company. They deliver food once a week, twice a week, sometimes every day to the catering trade, and people get asked for the feedback about that particular interaction. Another touch point survey would be a contact center inquiry or an installation or a service event, etc. Okay, really important that you think employee as well, not just so that they feel part of this, because as I mentioned before, we need them in the tent. and involved with a stake in this, but also because it's a source of insight. And we need, we will get challenged by our stakeholders and decision makers to explain what the data is telling us. And sometimes the answer to that question can come within the saved service that the movement in the KPI is sourced from. But sometimes you need to look in other areas. And we had a great example recently of a contact center challenge. So we had a service desk which was trending down. The operational stats looked okay. The customer feedback data wasn't fully explaining the movement in those scores, but the employee data did tell us, because we picked up in that data set a sense of lack of empowerment, lack of confidence, and lack of clarity about what the frontline staff were empowered to do in what situations. So they were hesitant about being proactive with the customer because they weren't sure where the guardrails were. Really, really light bulb moment there that we could really jump on with the client and fix that, go into coaching, go into training, go into comms about what people are empowered to do, and the scores went up. So you need all the data that's going to give us the answers to the questions that will surface in the program. So that's a typical architecture that we work with clients to design the most effective B2B XI programs. And obviously they will all link together as well, as I'll show in a second. So a little bit more detail here. This is where the journey map comes back in, because once we know the key journey steps, then we know what the make or break moments will be, and then we know where we have to put listening posts in or source data to allow us to get control of those levers. We will potentially have overview of those aspects of the relationship within the relationship survey. We may also get them in the journey surveys as well. And this is just an example of how it's really important, if you look at the bottom level, that we get contextual data into the data set so that we can understand the movements and place them in context. So it's not just about what the customers tell us, the solicited feedback, but it's also about marrying that up with what we know the customer has experienced, who the customer is, what their particular context and sector and role is. Once we've got all of that, then we can really make smart decisions and understand what we need to do. And this is an example of what the ecosystem can look like. So typically we have operational metrics, which is what I touched on just now, which will give the context, and also they'll allow us to route the respondent, if it's a survey, to the right relevant question that they will remember. That's another key aspect of this. So it's about survey routing, context, and also being able to analyze the impact of wait times, for example, on downstream metrics like NPS, if that's what you're using, and through into the business metrics. So that's the upstream linkage, so that we can say to the business, look, when we underperform operationally, this is the impact on the customer. So then you get into the transactional studies, which will deliver those insights. And then the relationship survey will be typically a lagging indicator, so that if we really, really improve our speed, transaction wait time, product availability, those kind of operational metrics, we will see a speedy uplift in the transactional scores, transactional NPS, if that's what you're using. But that will take time to feed through into the RNPS score moving forth, because the RNPS score is not based on an individual event, but rather a collection of experiences over potentially a long period of time. So that's the kind of movement that we're looking to deliver the XI, and then clearly the outcome will be those business metrics moving. They will take time to shift typically. So sometimes we see quick wins with a reduction in churn once we've fixed a pain point, and that's very exciting when that happens. Sometimes it takes a while, but bear with, you do need to keep that focus always. Don't get into the weeds when we need to on these programs, but always keep that focus on what this is about, the business metrics, because ultimately that's all the CEO will care about. If the NPS goes up and they can report that in the annual report, they like to do that quite often, but they get a lot more excited if churn goes down, share of wallet goes up, retention and all of that. So that's basically the system that we need to build that delivers this data set to allow us to do these kind of analyses and drive these kind of outcomes. So to simplify that down, and hopefully this is something you can apply and reference in terms of comparison with what you're doing now or what you're planning to do. As I've mentioned before, customer experience is an outcome, but actually it's the business metrics that flow from that which are the true end game here. But in terms of the design of a program, this hierarchy is hopefully quite useful. I mentioned before, yes, ask them about the rational elements of the relationship, the account management, the sales process, the install process, the delivery process, and so on. But also, you do need to leverage open-ended verbatim comments using text analytics like InMoment's fantastic and powerful text analytics toolkit to understand not just the nitty-gritty of the experience and the detail and the nuance in there, but also the sentiment and the strength of feeling. To my point earlier, that is really important, that we understand where people get quite intense about something. We know that we need to focus particularly in those areas. Other things they will forget, but if they feel something, they won't forget that. They're less likely to forget that. It's the Maya Angelou quote, we forget what people say to us, but we don't forget how they made us feel. Apply it here, and that will allow us to cut through the data and focus on those areas that will be the moments of truth. Then the interactions, again, will come back from that customer journey map. And hopefully by now you can see the importance of the customer journey map as the foundation to the whole program. So just a simple how-to checklist, which will hopefully be of use on the purpose and the design. We've talked about the stakeholders and who are the users of the insights, but also the providers of insights as well. Look at that in the round. Don't miss anybody out, because from painful experience, clients have come to us and said, look, we've got a problem with governance here and buy-in. And, you know, we'll typically say, I'm having a conversation already with a client that needs to move to us and wants our guidance as to how they avoid the mistakes of the past. And what I'm going to say to them when I get this call in a couple of days is, who designed this? Who wasn't consulted? Because we've seen it time and time again. If people are not consulted, sometimes they accept it, sometimes they like it, but often they don't because they weren't involved. And so the quality of the design of the program is absolutely important, but actually as important, or maybe even more important, is who's had a say, who's been listened to create this. So that's a really key element. Okay, so the metrics to measure: who are we going to survey? Which contacts? How are we going to tailor the surveys around the personas and roles of the people that we're seeking feedback from? And then think about the execution. What will be the trigger, the contact rules, the right amount of dialogue with customers? Who's going to own it? Who's going to own the actions? How do we get the inner loop and outer loop actions flowing? And also the communications over the top of the whole program to maintain momentum and engagement. Now, I haven't gone through some of those other elements because this is more about the design part of the process. I would, however, just mention very briefly the vital importance of end-to-end engagement. Do not ever just think of this as a survey. Whenever you're going out to B2B, if you just launch a survey, it will likely fail. You have to do all of this to make it a campaign, a process, something that will benefit the participants. They will get something back from the time we're asking of them, and they will see that so that they come back and do it next time. So absolutely critical that you do all of this, even to the point with solutions providers. We've got the CEO to record a video of what this is about, why it's important, and why everybody should jump in. Okay, case study there, which will be in the pack that we distribute, but might sound like a lot of work, but it really, really, really is worth it, because you get wonderful outcomes and you get ahead in the market if you can overcome some of the challenges that we've outlined. So I'll just share that again briefly. The 5 steps that absolutely are vital. Don't just jump into design. And with that, I'll pass back to John.
Thanks, Derek. That was great, and thanks for leaving us with that that poignant thought about it's not just about the survey. I think that's something that we often see that people do forget. I've got a couple of questions come in. Have we got time for maybe one of them? Question, Derek. We sell our products through distributors. How are we going to get customer feedback from clients that are actually using our products? Thoughts on that one?
Yeah, well, that's a challenge that many of us potentially on this call will be familiar with. Actually, I mentioned one of our clients earlier on who has that exact challenge, because they sell, they're 2 steps removed from the end customer, sometimes 3. And there, you know, there will often be a service interaction or an after sales sale interaction with the end customer. That's an opportunity to get feedback directly. But typically intermediaries will own the customer relationship, and the only way to break through that is to partner with them and give them the feedback, potentially anonymize it before it gets back to you. And that could be a good deal you can do with intermediaries that benefits everyone.
Perfect. We've got 1 minute left, so I'll hit you with one more question. How do we roll out an experience improvement program when our business has business lines that are really different? I think that's quite a common thing that we see.
Yes, it is. And we always ask the question, are you one business or are you not? And if you're not one business, then potentially the programs can be run separately. But typically, even if you are materially different businesses, there's still usually some common core that we can agree to, which we can use, which allows at least a bit of efficiency through standardizing and a degree of comparison. So I would hunt hard for a common core, but the amount of the program that is common and amount that is variable will depend on the diversity of the business.
Perfect. Thanks, Derek. Thank you for that. And thank you, everyone, for attending the webinar. I hope you found it very enjoyable and interesting. You will all be getting a recording of this. I also just highlight this date. It's the 3rd of February next year, and we're going to run a series of deep dive sessions around this conversation. So everybody who's participated will be getting an invitation to join in with that, probably early January time after the Christmas rush. But thank you all again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.